Hello all, Andrew Petersen here from the Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia. Hopefully you can see me and not John from Wbcsd. We're going to start a little bit early because I'm conscious that we've got a lot to get through and talk about, and very exciting times at the COP. So let me actually welcome all of our speakers in right now. Okay, so Boris is back and no one's leaving the Climate Action Centre, the equivalent of Big Brother House, until there is an outcome. Will it be positive though? And how will it rate on the Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia Good COP Barometer? You'll have to wait until tomorrow. Let me open up the program by acknowledging that the land on which this is being broadcast to you today is the land of the Camaragal people, and we acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging, and particularly welcome any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders who may be joining us today. Well, what a difference 24 hours makes, doesn't it, people? Three critical developments I picked up. China and the US vow to work together to slow global warming. Who knew? Issuing a surprise statement that injects new momentum into the last days of the climate negotiations. The two sides apparently agree to boost efforts to cut emissions, including tackling methane and illegal deforestation. Secondly, though, elsewhere, the news wasn't quite so positive, as India has demanded rich countries pay, I think it is $1 trillion by 2030. I don't know whose credit card could handle that, equal to the funds pledged to all poor countries before it agrees to slash planet warming emissions. And then, of course, there was the draft text, the cover version that was published on Wednesday morning, Glasgow time, by the UK as the UK president, setting out the probable outcome of these COP talks, including a potential requirement for countries to return to the negotiating table next year to beef up their national plans on cutting greenhouse gas emissions. The text also sets out the scientific case for limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and expressed alarm that emissions were far higher than the levels needed to stay. So for this program, we're throwing out the format and welcoming our three speakers immediately to have an opportunity for a deep dive on the business and subnational government action across the last 2 weeks, and gauge their response to the COP to date. But because Kate is the novice at COP, she gets the first question. And Kate kind of heard one of 3 questions that I would ask, but I'll ask the coat question. So Kate, did you put your coat into the coat stall and find that it wasn't there when you got back?
So you may have to move on to another question, because no, I was immediately walked in, saw the enormous queues for the coat stall and thought, no way, what am I going near that coat stall? So I've been carrying it.
You've carried your coat, which I think the other two would attest to. That's exactly how you do it. Yes, absolutely right.
Yes,
all right.
Did not fall for that one.
So a big welcome to Kate Wilson, the Executive Director of Climate Change and Sustainability at New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. And I got the DPI right. Welcome back to Keryn James, the Global Group CEO of ERM, who's coming to us live from London. And John Revess, did I get that right?
Perfect. Well done.
Director of Net Zero Ambition for the WBCSD. A big thank you to all three of you for joining. Now, we'll start with Kate as well, because she gets the serious question first. What have you / New South Wales government been doing and focused on while you've been at COP?
So we came really to engage with other subnational governments. So, you know, one of the interesting things, you referred to the declaration, the pledges that are coming out, but as we know, they're signed up to by national governments, and in many countries, definitely including Australia, it's what we call the subnational government. So in our case, the states and territories that are taking a great deal of action. So we came to represent New South Wales at the General Assembly of something called the Under 2 Coalition. Our now Treasurer and Minister, the Honourable Matt Keane, was very, very keen, you can't avoid that pun, to come. But unfortunately, because New South Wales Parliament is doing a lot of post-COVID catch-up, he had to attend to parliamentary duties. So myself and a colleague came to represent New South Wales. The Under 2 is a global network of state and regional governments. So it was formed just after COP21 in Paris and it now has 260 state and regional governments. So it's, you get these fantastic statistics, but it represents 1.75 billion people and 50% of the global economy. So really what we've been doing is getting to know and understand, what kind of policies local, those kind of state and regional governments are doing. And we're also here trying to establish a more formalized ongoing collaboration forum where we can share and learn from each other on developing new policies.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll drill down into that in a minute. But let's go around to the other two. John, WBCSD, probably the biggest activity of WBCSD I have ever witnessed in my entire life of being connected with WBCSD. And before you launch into the absolute smorgasbord list of what's been going on, everybody should go onto the website because they have been absolutely ruthless and diligent about putting it onto the site itself. What have been the highlights of the activity of WBCSD, pardon me, over the last few days?
Thank you, Andrew, and it's great to be able to join you. Look, I think the real highlight is the presence of business in all the themes covered by the COP agenda. And it's not just the fact that WBCSD is running an enormous amount of events. It's because with the support of our members and ambitious business, we are right here, kind of in the room. So we're not yet at the negotiation table, but we're being encouraged to have a presence here. And there are protesters that have got noises to make. But generally, that presence has been welcomed. The barometer that our CEO uses is that there are more CEOs here at COP than probably all the other COPs put together.
Wow.
So
okay.
That is quite something.
That's a benchmark. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is, they're here because they realize this is important for their business, but also they've heard the call that they need to advocate within their bilaterals wherever they can to encourage strong commitment, and they've heard that they're doing it, and we have to take some credit for the encouraging progress that is being made.
Well, let's move to Keryn. And sorry, I'm adding a lozenge because I lost my voice. Okay, move to Keryn. Now, she stylishly has to wear two hats, which is that of ERM, but also WBCSD. Since we spoke to you last week, what have you been doing, Keryn, at COP?
Well, I mean, as you said, Andrew, I've been wearing two hats. So really two objectives. One, sort of from an ERM perspective, is to both contribute to the debate and the dialogue, but also to really listen and understand what's coming out so that we can help our clients understand, obviously, what's happening and what they need to be doing, what they can be doing, what the opportunity is for them, as well as what some of the challenges might be. From a WBCSD point of view, we have been focusing on a few things, and one of the things in particular, which I thought I'd talk about, Andrew, I completely agree with John's comments about the role of business, so I won't repeat that, but I will talk specifically about the WBCSD's launch yesterday of the Hydrogen Pledge. This is something that through the WBCSD, ERM has been supporting with secondments. This is something that we started working on about 8 months ago, 6 to 8 months ago. And within that very short period of time, we've not only established the basis for assessing carbon intensity of hydrogen, so getting away from the grey, blue, green sort of very crude definition through to looking at the carbon intensity of different types of hydrogen, so that we can have a much more informed position for companies to decide how they're going to decarbonize hydrogen, because some forms of hydrogen are obviously very high carbon intensity. So we announced the pledge and launched the pledge yesterday. We have 28 companies signed up to either a demand side pledge, a supply side pledge, and or a technical and financial support pledge. And as part of that, in very simple terms, the total of those 28 pledges, and we know that there are more to come. There are some companies that are going to pledge that haven't yet announced. But the total of those pledges up until the session yesterday was effectively equivalent to a quarter of all of the avoided carbon emissions that the Hydrogen Council believes that hydrogen will be able to achieve, which I think is just extraordinary, given the very short period of time that we have been focused on this. Within the session yesterday, the president of EDP, one of the large European sort of energy companies, increased their pledge by 5 times. And their pledge was already relatively significant. So I just wanted to draw attention to that, because I know that hydrogen, in particular green hydrogen or lower carbon hydrogen, because no hydrogen is completely green, but the commitment around green hydrogen or lower carbon hydrogen in Australia is gathering momentum. And I would hope that this particular announcement will really encourage people to do that. So it's a joint initiative with the Sustainable Markets Initiative, and one of the players, obviously, that has committed to a very significant demand side pledge is FFI, Fortescue Future Industries, and they have come in with a very significant, in fact, by far the largest demand side pledge. So I'm really excited about that, because I think one of the things we've heard a lot about at COP is kind of, sort of lots of ideas, lots of commitments, lots of goals, but this is something that's very tangible, very specific at the company level, and at whether it's demand, supply, etc. So for me, this is something that's incredibly executable, and that's one of the biggest criticisms that particularly the youth activists have had of this COP. And I think, actually justifiably so, is that we actually haven't delivered on the pledges that we've made already at COP21, and therefore, where's the action? We don't believe you, we don't trust you, where's the action? And so for me, this is one of the most exciting things, because it's incredibly tangible.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on that as a thread back through the three of you, which is this, not just the sheer volume of the number of pledges or announcements, but the elements of them. They are coordinated, they're collaborative, they are complex. So they're not just, we will do dib, 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 dob, dob, dob. We will actually do, as you just indicated with the hydrogen pledge. It focuses on all aspects of the value chain in relation to that challenge. And the question to all of you is to pick one of those particular announcements that you've either been involved in or you've observed. What surprised you about it coming forward? And it might be that it came forward at all, that it comes forward in the context of government and business working together. It comes forward, as you say, Keryn, in such a way that it becomes increasingly difficult to say, well, that's just never going to happen. I'd be interested to understand what you've been surprised by in hearing or being involved in these particular pledges or announcements or initiatives. So back to you firstly, Keryn.
A really good question, Andrew, and I could list a whole bunch of them. And I think the one that I would probably call attention to is the most recent one, which is actually the announcement last night by the US and China. I actually said to somebody last week, we were discussing this, and I said, I would not be surprised if China comes in with something before the COP closes, because I think it's, that's very like them to, sort of make a sort of a separate announcement. And while it's very vague on detail, it is very vague on detail. I think the mere fact of it, the mere fact that the US and China have been able to agree on climate is a massive, massive, massive step forward.
Yeah, if I can just interject at that point, I indicated on a webinar today that I considered it to be the détente of climate change for our generation. It was just an amazing announcement. It's a massive step forward. There will be enormous steps back, but the simple fact that it's now on the table is equivalent to what the US and Russia did back in the early 1980s. And we know what important ramifications they had for the security of the planet. John, what about you? What have you observed as the important elements of either the work of WBCSD or any other announcement or pledge that you've seen so far?
Yeah, I think across many areas, we've seen the development of what is being called these buyers clubs for low carbon products, and that is seen as incredibly critical because you can have the commitment of companies to develop and launch low carbon solutions, but to scale those, we need the commitment that there's going to be a market for those products, right? And under the Marrakesh Partnership, there was a big announcement through the Mission Possible partnership around some of these need to abate sectors. So moving away from this idea they're hard to abate, we need to abate. So for low carbon steel, low carbon cement, low carbon aluminium, increasingly there are a collective of substantial volume that is going to give confidence to these new solutions to come to market. And I think nowhere do we see that more than from the automotive sector, which is really now ramping up substantial commitment, and that investment is now taking place. Who would ever thought we would have close to near zero carbon steel, and yet that is what is now coming to market, and that it's easy to say that's just a single material, but in fact, as I'm sure everyone knows, that's the collection of an enormous number of technologies across a whole value chain in order to build a new value chain that has never happened before. So it's great to see all that coming together, and that I think that's very, very encouraging.
And so, Kate, we saw the release of the Climate Change Performance Index report, and it wasn't a particularly good end-of-year report for Australia. But the thing that struck me was the call out about the state and territory performance and how critical that has been to Australia being still in the game, if I can put it that way, around the net zero ambition and climate action more broadly. I very much welcome your observations around the subnational government engagement, not just Australia, but right across the board, and what you're seeing and talking to others at the COP about the role of subnational governments in driving this particular agenda right at this moment.
Yeah, thank you. So it's very interesting working with other subnational governments. Clearly, there's a number of examples around the world of major scale countries like Australia, the US, Brazil is another one where there's a large kind of provincial regional government structure, and all of them are engaging very deeply. The Under 2 coalition itself, I was just thinking how to frame this in terms of pledges, but to join the Under 2, we all sign an MOU, and that is being used as a racket, I guess, a mechanism to collectively ratchet up our ambition all the time, and then we potentially sign up to different actions, so we're actually supporting each other. It's very clear that in many countries around the world, Australia very much included as well, that it's actually the state governments, regional governments that have many of the levers to achieve net zero as well. So in our case in New South Wales, clearly we've had the net zero target by 2050 for some time, and we just increased our 2030 target to a 50% reduction. And we know how we're going to do it, I think is the important thing, because we're running the electricity. We're going to be working very closely with the farming sector soon. We're working with, released an electric vehicle strategy. It's great to hear all this talk about the, generating the buyers clubs, because we also released a sustainable materials strategy and are just taking legislation through Parliament around the circular economy, and that will play a big role in reducing carbon as well. So I guess the role of regional governments in a way is just very practical. Get on and do it, and we can learn so much from each other, from different physical settings, different policy settings, different political governance setups, that it's just fantastic to be able to actually work together.
So let's take a slightly different tack at this point. And because it's been now acknowledged as the single largest gathering of any climate change negotiation in history, I'd like your thoughts on, having been there, one has recently left, one's leaving tomorrow, I think, and John's probably there until sometime in 2022. What has impressed you / surprised you about this COP so far? Why don't we start with Kate and we'll go back the other way?
Well, I'm impressed by how friendly everybody is, and how, you know, the queues can be pretty large. I've been timing how long it takes from getting to the first gate. So for those of you who are not there, you get to the first gate, you have to show your accreditation, you have to show your negative COVID test. Then you get to the next one, you show your accreditation again. Then you go through a security screening. And if you've brought a bottle of water with you, which you need because it's very hot and dry, you have to literally stand there and drink something from the water to prove that you're not bringing in acid. Then you go again, you get scanned in. You know, it's just these successive layers of security, but they're all super friendly. People very helpful in showing us around. And I'd have to give a shout out to the Australian government, actually, they've had a pavilion there, in the country pavilions, and they've been fantastic at hosting us and allowing us to hold meetings there, giving us free tea. And I'm not a coffee drinker, but apparently the Australian pavilion does have the best coffee on the floor, which
it has the longest queue, Kate. It has the longest queue of all the coffee queues.
But that also had a great advantage, because I was able to run into somebody I was desperately needing to talk to, and I found her in the queue, and then we were able to have a spontaneous meeting. So it was, it's those kinds of things that make a difference, and how you actually find people amidst the however many tens of thousands are wandering around.
It is extraordinary, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You just happen to be walking past and you go, oh my goodness, I've been needing to talk to you. Let's go and have coffee.
Yeah.
At the Australian Pavilion. What about you, John? You've been on the ground for probably the longest of all of them. What's impressed / surprised you thus far?
Well, on the humorous side first, I ended up in a pub tasting whiskies last night, and surprise, all the people that I've been wanting to talk to over the past week, and all the world turned up in my pub. So I think the benefit of being together physically in the same place. So you said this is the biggest COP ever. That is actually really helping to build this community and allowing us to accelerate our plans, commitments, and actions. So it is a great place to meet, and I think Glasgow has been very welcoming as a city. When I've taken Ubers back or bumped into locals, they all want us to be successful here. There's so much goodwill. So I kind of echo all of that. And I think inside the venue, it's just lovely to see the variety of Indigenous peoples, of all the nations being there, and there's a common purpose, and I think that's what I'll take out of this. I went to the first event I went to was giving a chance to hear from different Indigenous peoples, and that opened my mind. And it kind of refreshed me, and I think whether it's through the coffee or whether through different meetings, we're all going away saying, yeah, there's work to be done, but we're in it together.
Yeah, that's really interesting observation, and it echoes. I've just come off the briefing from the Australian government and the head of delegation from the government thus far, and roughly saying the same thing, that the engagement, particularly with Indigenous groups and representations and human rights groups, has been a very important element of the storytelling that will be taken out of this COP, particularly and hopefully the positive outcome that it is. Keryn, now I know what your answer will be, of course, which is the highlight for you was to come on G'day Glasgow last week, but I suspect that there probably were a few other highlights if not surprises. So what were they?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, maybe I'll just start with, I'll start with the thing that sort of depressed me. And, just listening to Kate talk about, the level of activity that's going on at the state and territory level, the level of activity that's going on within business, including Australian business. And I'm just a bit sad that our national government just couldn't step up to the plate in a way that I think is both necessary and frankly kind of being demanded by Australians. And I don't know if you saw this, but this was the wrapper around the Financial Times earlier in the week, and I sent it to you.
I shared your photograph on the next program, and I guarantee you, if I could turn the microphones on, there would have been gasps.
Right.
There was shock and awe on the chat function around. Oh my goodness!
Exactly. So it was quite an extraordinary thing, which really was a talking point. So I'm a bit sad about that, but I'm hopeful that perhaps with the momentum that's building around the non-state actors and the state and territories, that perhaps we'll get some more ambition. So to sort of slightly start on a negative note, on a positive note, and the highlights. I mean, I think. I'll pick up on something different to what the others have said, and I agree. The coffee was definitely very good in the Australian pavilion, and I would give second place to the business pavilion. Actually, the barista there was excellent and makes a mean flat white. So if anybody hasn't been there, they also make good coffee if you're trying to avoid the queue.
It's good to know that Peter Backer has a second job. Great, that's fantastic.
Exactly. I think the thing that has really impressed me about this is the youth activism around COP. So they are in equal parts furious, highly informed and educated, and very well organised. Their protest on Saturday. And I attended an event on Tuesday evening where they had 3 of the key global activists, the leading BIPOC activist, a young lady who's based in India. Sorry, she's Indian, but she lives in Ireland, and a gentleman from Honduras. They were just talking about their role and how they see their role in this. And I think, for the first time, I think we're seeing the youth being taken seriously and hopefully being given a seat at the table, not just for this, for this event, but being given a seat at the table in the broadest sense of the word. And I think that they are driving for and pushing for change at a pace that I think others are perhaps less comfortable with, but it is really forcing people to think about their perspective, their point of view. What they say the children shall inherit the earth, and that is incredibly true. So I've been incredibly impressed with their input, their approach, etc. And I really welcome that, because I think it's a really important part of the dialogue if we're going to have an inclusive and a just transition.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And there was an interesting insight from some commentator today about the comment from Greta Thunberg about it being the greatest Northern Hemisphere greenwash festival was for so many people considered to be misguided and shrill, and yet China and the US the next day do what they do. And so is there consequence in terms of calling out the inaction from key parties, from youth, properly engaged in this? This is the thing that struck me this time, that the opposition is highly organised and articulate about what it is they want to see achieved, rather than complaining about what's not happening. Now, I have to read my last question because I was so proud of the way in which I wrote it. And what we'll do is we'll ask Kate to go first, and then John, and then Keryn. So the question is, what would you say to the CEO that you sat next to on the train or the plane trip home from COP when they saw your delegate badge and asked why he because of course the law of averages tells us that he's a he, unless you are the head, group CEO of ERM, of course, why he should care about what goes on at these climate meetings and how does any decision that they make actually impact his business. So Kate, over to you.
Thank you. I would echo some of the comments, that Keryn's just been making about the youth. One of the things that struck me attending the conference is, I've been going to some of the big plenary sessions, going to Blue Zone, and there is a lot of talk that's either, reiterating the huge mess we're in now and talking about the urgency, but we know that, or there's envisaging a future. I went to a talk on the future of food in 2050, which was all lovely. There's no food waste left and we're making good products out of the waste, and all of ag is sustainable. But I've heard almost nothing about very little about the how do we actually get there and the concrete steps. So, we've covered this bit in this discussion already, but to me, there's such a strong role for business in actually filling that gap in developing the products and the supply and demand for these new products, new ways of doing business. I think there's not just physical products, but there's how do we, what kind of services, how do we actually live going forward? How do we shift our patterns of behavior? And so much of that government is very much trying to help and facilitate, but in the end, that comes down to business. So I just think huge opportunities for business to, do what business needs to do, but from my perspective, even more importantly, make that real tangible contribution to putting us clearly on the path to net zero.
Okay, I'll summarize that by climate recovery. Business is the how. And John, you can take that and give it to WBCSD, and I expect to see it on a report in the not too distant future. So, John, what about you? What are you going to say to this aging, over 50-year-old male sitting there, probably downing his second scotch, which he didn't get after talking to you? What are you going to say? Why should I care about all this COP stuff?
Look, I think very simply, it's businesses provide services and products to serve society, and we know how angry the younger generation are because they don't see these commitments being translated into action. Exactly what Kate was saying, and this is the opportunity. It's not a risk. It's get on, getting the journey. I know, Andrew, you've been instrumental in getting the Race to Zero retail commitments, going in Australia, and thank you for your efforts there. But
thank you.
I think this is the opportunity. It's actually it's across trade associations, being able to bring in large businesses all the way through their supply chains, and being able to translate that into meaningful steps, into a pathway. We're all on the journey together, and we all have a chance to lean in and see this for the opportunity that it is, as well as trying to future-proof your own business.
Oh, good answer. Good answer. Keryn, you'll do even better. But yeah, that was a good answer. That was a good answer.
So I would say, given that, CEOs often don't have a huge amount of brain space, I would say three things. One is, first of all, it's not that they don't have big brains; they just don't have a lot of space in it for lots of new things, perhaps. So the first thing I would say is, incredibly importantly, because you are part of this humanity, right? Just because you're a CEO doesn't mean you're not a human being that doesn't have family and doesn't have children and potentially also has grandchildren. So, we are part of this humanity. So we have to be part of the solution. The second thing I would say is, as a CEO, you have incredible power for change within your business, across your industry sector, and even in terms of influencing, the political agenda. So there's power there, and it needs to be used and deployed effectively. And then I think the third thing is that this is a significant business opportunity and you have the potential to really create value over the long term. And then in brackets, and if you don't, your business model is doomed.
Yep. Okay, John, she wins. Sorry. Thanks for playing.
Always.
But I don't think it's competition.
should I say, put that all together from the three speakers, and I think we've gone and comprehensively answered what was a very overly complicated question. But I do thank you for humouring me with that particular one, because I was quite proud of it. All right, well, I'm conscious of time, and I should, before I finish, thank John for the shout out about the retail campaign. Yes, it was a struggle, but we got it over the line, and we're delighted that the Australian Retailers Association did come on board as an pledge to the accelerator. That's very exciting. And as I said to the head of sustainability at the ARA only today, yeah, you think that was easy. Now the hard work begins. But that's what we're in it for. So, look, thank you so much to the three of you, to Kate, to John, and to Keryn for, and in Keryn's case, coming back to join with us at G'day Glasgow. I found that fantastic. It was such a joy to have you join us. May I wish those of you who are still in Glasgow all the safest return, as in when you are leaving. And as always, stay COVID safe. In terms of tomorrow's, stay tuned. We're trying to pull a few strings. And while I've got John and Keryn on board, can I say, could you talk to Maria Mendeluce to tell her to come onto the show? I have emailed Sophia Punt, and I've actually linked in Maria to say, come on board, because you went and did a piece at the beginning of last week for the Impact X conference, and that was fantastic. But I'd like the back end to bookend what you've learnt from this COP in your fantastic leadership as the CEO of Women Business Coalition. So please, 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 whatever you can do, that would be really appreciated. All right, that was a public grovel on my part. I do thank you once again, all three of you. Thank you to our audience for sticking through with it. As usual, a copy of the recording will be put up onto YouTube within the next few hours. And as I've said, every night, bar one, respect the science, respect nature, and respect each other. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a great day. Bye for now.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks.
Thanks.